Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, licensed acupuncturist, and today we're going to be talking about fibromyalgia and different approaches to this very difficult to treat condition. My guest today is Chris Volesky, who is so deep into the fibromyalgia world and who I had the pleasure of studying with a little while back. Chris holds a master's in acupuncture and herbal medicine from Northwestern Health Sciences University. He has co-authored a fibromyalgia treatment protocol for Carolina's healthcare system, where he and his coworkers treated hundreds of patients suffering from fibromyalgia. He has taught this protocol to people practicing all over the world, and he has co-founded a company solely dedicated to providing solutions for fibromyalgia called fibrosolution.com. Chris Volesky, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Brodie. It's a pleasure.
So I really wanted to have you on the show, particularly to talk about this, because you have a way of really making complicated things accessible and being able to break down what's a very complex kind of a disease and a problem into really understandable terms. And I just felt like people could really benefit from hearing directly from you about this condition. But for those who might maybe not have fibromyalgia themselves, but might know someone who with this condition or have heard something about it, could you just outline briefly what fibromyalgia is so that we have some context for this conversation?
Sure thing. Fibromyalgia is a complex syndrome that involves multiple body systems that kind of get all intertwined together. So the key feature and what it's named for is pain. And usually this means widespread body pain. And this can start for any number of reasons. But as this progression occurs, it starts to cause problems with other body systems, which can lead to things like digestive problems, problems with stress, problems with circulation, and so on and so forth, hormonal problems. But it basically all begins with something that causes some type of pain that the body can't quite bounce back from. And then beyond that, it starts to sort of create some chaos with the body that starts to involve these other systems.
So it's pain that can kind of come and go in a chronic way, in an intermittent way, but that typically, like, pain isn't the only thing. It can affect some people with sleep issues. It can affect some people with gut health issues. There can be hormonal imbalances, tiredness, right? Chronic fatigue, these kinds of things. So really it can look very different in a lot of different bodies. How is it that you can come up with a protocol when it can present in so many different ways?
Well, of course, first of all, seeing hundreds of people with this, you start to notice patterns and trends in what is going on and what the disease progression starts to look like. And what we've noticed over interviewing hundreds of patients and looking at which body systems are involved, that there are basically 8 key areas that have some form of disharmony or some form of problem within these different areas. And if you overlay your medical background on how the body works and how one body system supports and feeds another, or how when one body system is sick, how it can affect other body systems, you can start to put together a method to address these in a specific order so that you know that you're properly addressing all of these body systems and in a proper order, so that as one system gets better, it starts to support and feed the next system, so that when you work on that one, it starts to reinforce what you've already done, rather than getting to a point where, okay, maybe you're just slightly better from doing whatever therapy it is, and then just regressing altogether, which is usually the problem that we see when we're seeing people that are suffering from long-term fibromyalgia.
It makes so much sense, right? In the context in Chinese medicine, we take it as a given that every system affects every other system of the body, and kind of looking at people in a very specific bio-individual way to see what's going on for this individual. There are these patterns of disharmony that we go after. And so like nothing that we're going to talk about is by any means a one size fits all solution. And that's I think a really beautiful thing. It's like, yeah, there are trends and patterns, and at the same time, no one is a textbook, and there's no typical presentation for this condition.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing that we see is that most people suffering from chronic fibromyalgia will have a predominant stage, and that usually means that that's probably where the problem originated from. But to a large extent, we still follow a sort of progression to make sure that even if it's a stage 3 thing, we make sure that the first 2 stages are properly covered so that those are not feeding into or causing a worsened stage 3 issue. So that this way we can make sure that, okay, we've got our bases covered. And usually it just means that, okay, if that stage 3 was their stage, we're going to spend a bit more time on that stage versus all the others.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. In other words, it's a process. It's not that necessarily that people will move through. It's not just one thing that you're doing.
Exactly.
From an allopathic medicine perspective, fibromyalgia is a pretty knotty condition. It's pretty difficult to treat. What is the typical treatment? Like if someone gets this diagnosis from their MD, what's usually prescribed?
Well, it is a complex process. And part of the problem is sometimes it takes months or even years even to get to that diagnosis because usually so many other disease processes have to be ruled out. So that means a lot of blood tests. Sometimes it means bouncing to different specialists. But once you do have that diagnosis, the typical therapy then is to start trying different drug therapies. There are about 3 drugs that are approved by the FDA that are known to help with symptoms of fibromyalgia. And then usually it's that along with something for digestion if they've got digestive problems. And usually that combined with some over the counter NSAID type drugs, things like ibuprofen and acetaminophen to help manage breakthrough pains.
And how effective are those typically for people?
Unfortunately, they typically don't work that well long term. I mean, as you know, most of these drugs can cause side effects in the long term. And if you look at the side effects that they can cause, some of the side effects actually involve pain, such as like low back pain. They can cause abdominal pain. Some of them will actually cause gastrointestinal bleeding. So bleeding in the intestines or in the stomach. Some of them can cause organ damage, like liver or kidney damage when taken for prolonged periods of time. And the really, really scary thing is that some of these that have been approved can actually cause or increase a tendency towards suicidal ideation, which is, of course, an extremely scary thing. But the problem is, it doesn't take very long usually that a patient will habituate to these drugs, meaning that the effectiveness may have been somewhat decent early on, but then over time, the body stops responding as well to it, and the pain kind of comes back, if you will, or
Yeah.
it gets worse again.
And this is a condition that there isn't a cure for, right? It's something that people can manage with drugs, and as you just pointed out, those drugs often decrease in their efficacy over time. And so, and yet, it's a condition that, according to allopathic medicine, it won't resolve. It's something that is managed rather than transcended.
It's a little, that's the thing about it. It gets very, very complex. So when we were looking at disease, like say, several years back, they found a cure for hepatitis C. And now it was in some ways probably a lot easier because we know we're dealing with a liver disease. We know we're dealing with a virus, so that the research could be poured into that kind of thing. And eventually they did come up with a cure for it. But when we're looking at fibromyalgia, we're looking at an extremely complex presentation that's involving stress, cortisol. We know it's involving digestion. We know it's involving the hormonal system, the immune system, the nervous system, sometimes even the cardiovascular system. So it's virtually impossible to identify some one piece that's wrong or one little test that's going to somehow identify what's going on with the body as a whole. I mean, from that paradigm, the greatest hope is to just come up with more drugs to help in managing symptoms.
So, you obviously, this isn't how you manage it. I'm curious, what is your approach to treating fibromyalgia like?
Actually, a lot of parts of it are oddly simple. a big part of it is we look at what we can do with the lifestyle. We look at the diet. We do some type of mindset coaching as well, because dealing with a condition like this for 10, 15, 20 years can slowly poison the mind over time, and it can make a person feel a lack of hope. So that becomes a big part of it. We utilize natural medicine. We utilize something called gastrotransmitter therapy, where we can actually cause changes within the body through simple exercises that we teach our patients, and then they can go and they can do these. It actually teaches them to take care of themselves over time, so that when we work for them for 12 or 16 weeks, by the end of it, they've got the tools so that they can take care of themselves. And by that time, by 12 weeks, most of them are pretty well back to living a normal life again.
That is really incredible, because it is fibromyalgia, at least like the patients that I've seen over the years in my practice, it's like that it can be quite debilitating. And often, I don't know that I've ever treated someone with fibromyalgia who didn't have some kind of a mental, emotional symptom that went with it. As you mentioned, it's like, it's a drag to not be able to do life normally for a long time. It does wear away on people. Can you give us an example of something that is maybe common advice that you give to people across the board, like no matter what their individual presentation is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really simple one I came up with quite a while ago, because upon interviewing, patient after patient, I started noticing that almost every single person dealing with fibromyalgia is dealing with some form of chronic neck pain. And that if their neck feels better, I mean, it's a complete game changer that tends to increase their energy levels. They tend to think better, because, if you're sitting there in this neck pain all the time, your neck is very tight, it can kind of influence your thought process. So almost too simple. I tell them simply to, go home and put a scarf around their neck and just keep it there. So even if they're just at home all day, just keeping a scarf around the neck, it keeps the neck warm, and this helps the muscles in the neck to relax, so that it can actually give a decent bit of relief for just this one simple symptom. And I've shared this on a number of groups, and people will think it's a little bit weird, but then I'll get these messages a little bit later, and they'll say like, "Oh my God, that actually really helped." And it was just this very simple like lifestyle hack that you can do.
I love it. I love it. I mean, it's so easy to discount the simple things. And as you mentioned, gastrotransmitter therapy, what you're talking about essentially is working with the breath, right?
For the most part, yes. I mean, I guess a little bit of context would be good here.
Hmm.
Gastrotransmitters are just literal gaseous molecules in the body. And of course, we all know about oxygen and the body needing oxygen, but there are a varieties of these that we can alter through certain breath practices, through certain movement type practices. And this can kind of help in the regulation of multiple body systems. So as a keen example of this, there is a very important gastrotransmitter. It's called nitric oxide. And when we are exposed to psychosomatic stress, so when we are just experiencing stress and our cortisol levels start to rise, our body starts increasing the production of this gastrotransmitter. Now, this is a natural mechanism, but when you're dealing with some kind of chronic issue, or when you're dealing with chronic stress, and let's face it, any type of chronic issue can result in chronic stress, and it usually does. So when you're constantly kicking up this stuff, this nitric oxide into the body, the excess of that starts to actually cause a disintegration of our nerves. So literally destroying the sheath around our nerves, and actually our nerves' ability to communicate with each other. And for obvious reasons, this can cause a whole host of problems, but most notably with fibromyalgia, this usually results in a characteristic burning type pain that people will describe. They'll say like, "Oh, these muscles are burning," or at certain times they get burning pain here or there.
That is so fascinating to me. Because really, it sounds like what you're saying. Gastrotransmitter therapy, we can think of it as ways of manipulating the gases in our bodies that function as neurotransmitters and that have very specific functions systemically, like nitric oxide, and that nitric oxide in general, that when we have too much of it, is actually injures our nerves. Do I have that right?
Exactly. Actually, there's a well-known saying that I think most people can resonate with, and it's a term that's called "blind with rage." And
Yes.
I really love to bring this up because most people have already heard of it, but they don't really understand it. So what actually happens here is you start to become stressed, right? And your you get frustrated, maybe angry, and you go through a natural process. Your body goes through a natural process of trying to eliminate all this excessive gas because it's starting to essentially build pressure and inflammation inside the body. So naturally, people start doing things like they start sighing. People will say that, oh, you're getting all huffy because they're going, but their body's naturally trying to get rid of this. So they start sighing, they start raising their voice. Maybe people even start shouting throughout this process, and their body is like trying to eliminate the excess of gas that's occurring there. Now, if this is unsuccessful and this anger, this rage, this frustration persists, this nitric oxide can actually collect in the retina of the eye. That's the nerve, the major nerve behind the eye, and can start to detach it over time. This is why people will start to see spots when they get very angry, or after a while, it'll actually cause them to go completely blind after a while if it's not dealt with properly.
That is, yeah, that's such an interesting connection. And for the Chinese medicine practitioners listening, the connection between rage, shouting in the eyes, all ties together in the liver, according to Chinese medical theory. And that specifically and it would make a lot of sense, right? Sighing helps us. It's the way of the body naturally trying to regulate, trying to even out those gastrotransmitters. So one thing, and actually like that, the gastrotransmitter therapy of sighing until you yawn, I can't even tell you how many people I've taught that to who are stressed, basically, because of COVID, because of anything, because of life. Obviously, things have gotten a lot more stressful for people. And that has been just game changing for so many patients, not just people with fibromyalgia, but just literally anyone who's dealing with stress. And it's also diagnostically useful when I assign that to someone and it doesn't take them very long. And it's like, okay, well, then I know that's not our main disharmony, that we need to look somewhere else.
Exactly.
Perhaps, perhaps nourishing some deficiencies. Like, what happens when there's not enough nitric oxide in the body?
Well, if you're not producing enough of this, I mean, nitric oxide is used for virtually every biochemical process that we can think of. It's got a utility in a huge variety of places. Now, when we're not developing enough of it, it can do things like affect our immune system and our ability to fight infection. It can retard our ability to break down things that we call biofilms, which are basically a way that pathogens hide inside of our bodies. And this is a major problem with fibromyalgia, many autoimmune diseases, and virtually every major chronic disease you can name. It's responsible for warming up our bodies as well. So a deficit of it will already start to make the body feel more cold. It's responsible for helping the blood vessels expand and contract appropriately. So if there is too much or too little of it, it can cause flaccidity or like too relaxed blood vessels, or it can cause the blood vessels to spasm. Some people will resonate with this condition called Raynaud's, where your fingers and toes, the vessels in your fingers and toes spasm, and they get super cold, and then your fingers and toes start to turn like a whitish or purplish color because they're just not getting blood flow anymore. And the vessels themselves are starting to spasm. It's very, very common thing in fibromyalgia. So there's, you name a process, and in some way, shape, or form, nitric oxide is more than likely involved.
So interesting. And really kind of underscores the fact that so in Chinese medicine, we strip off the label and we look at the underlying pattern. And so for somebody with fibromyalgia, they might well need to be getting rid of their nitric oxide. And for other people, they might need to be building it depending on what stage they're in.
Exactly. And looking at which part of the body needs it. Sometimes some parts of the body need more of it when others don't. Some parts of the body actually need to get rid of it. Some of the research that we've done on some of the natural medicines that we've used, something that at one point we were calling enlightened tea, it's a combination of herbs that we were using. And basically the job of it was, some of the herbs were literally going around and scavenging these excessive pockets of nitric oxide in the body, because when nitric oxide collects and there becomes too much of it, it becomes very inflammatory. And it can cause this burning pain. It can cause muscles to actually contract. It's very similar to the process that occurs when you go into a fight or flight type mode. And anybody that's dealing with chronic stress and they're not fighting like heck or running like heck, they will basically end up with this same problem where the muscles begin to tense up very, very badly. And this is very common in fibromyalgia. It's very common in just about anybody suffering from arthritis. I mean, we've got people sitting at desks for their job, and maybe they start to get stressed over a meeting or over, how busy their job is. And this fight or flight response starts to kick in. Nitric oxide levels rise, their heart rate goes up, and sitting at a desk doing their job, about the last two things they could do is fight or run from the situation. So instead, that fight or flight response starts to hit their digestive system. It starts to tighten up their muscles. And then when it's finally time to get up and walk, the legs get so tight that now when you're walking, the impact of just simple walking now is not being taken by your muscles because they're too tight to properly move. So you get this impact that goes directly into the joint, and it's responsible for things like arthritis of the knees, arthritis of the hips, and basically up the entire spine into the neck. It can cause problems basically throughout the entire body just because the muscles get too tight from this response.
It's almost like everything's connected. that makes a lot of sense.
That, huh?
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by the coaching division at BrodieWelch.com. Could a 5 to 10 minute daily practice and 5 phone conversations really change your life? They did for my client Amanda, a high-powered doctor, mother, and activist who is struggling with chronic stress and low self-worth. She sorely needed time to meditate, exercise, make art, and just enjoy herself, but she felt guilty for saying no. She invested in my Getting Unstuck package and experienced a massive upgrade. She writes, "It's still mind-blowing to me how starting with little actions, for me the 5 to 10 minute breathing exercises and meditation, made such palpable differences. That made things like eating better, taking breathing breaks throughout the day, and exercising easier. Inexplicably though, that resulted in less comparison, less caring of what other people think of me, and more self-worth. That I was not expecting. In retrospect now, it makes perfect sense how you connected everything. I know that if I get sucked back into the urgency of the world and its expectations of me, that I will find my way back. I still love calling out, oh, there's that wood element again, when I rush to complete something despite being exhausted." See, there's a connection between how we take care of ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. I have a framework that can help. Yes, you do still have to do the work, but it might well be faster, easier, and more potent than you can ever imagine. Visit BrodieWelch.com/coaching, or just write to me at Brodie@BrodieWelch.com. That's Brodie with an IE and Welch with a CH, and start getting unstuck today. So, and one thing that makes me think of that one commonality to people that I've treated with fibromyalgia is that they don't like to exercise. They don't get that runner's high. They don't feel the same sort of like reward naturally from movement. It often hurts to move. And so it can be a difficult thing, like when, as a practitioner, when I want to basically turn on the jets in the jacuzzi, right? Increase circulation so that the person feels less stagnant and also build some energy. But there's a real resistance there. And so it's like, I can't blame them for their life experience. And yet we know how critical it is for how exercise is medicine for so many things in so many ways. I'm wondering what advice you give people around movement who are dealing with fibromyalgia.
It's very interesting that you asked this, because it was about a week or two ago that I recorded a video on this very topic to send out to my fibromyalgia clients. And what really happens here is, you start dealing with this chronic pain, and of course, you're tired from that pain. You're tired from dealing with this condition. Plus, you're taking medicines, and literally every single one of these medicines has fatigue and low energy as a side effect. So, your desire to even want to get up and move and do things essentially becomes blunted. Now, this lack of movement will then start to slow down blood flow. And we know from research that not moving enough, or especially when you're sleeping, our blood starts to get a bit thicker. The little platelets in our blood start to adhere to each other, and our blood starts to thicken up. Now, if you're dealing with chronic pain, or especially if you had an old injury, like scar tissue or an old surgical site, these areas with inhibited blood flow start to collect what we call free radicals. And, we heard a whole big buzz about this many years ago about how free radicals are causing aging, they cause inflammation and all this, and everybody wanted to get on supplements for that kind of thing. Well, if they're not moving enough, these free radicals start to collect. And then once you do get up movement, you finally get the drive, like, hey, I'm going to go exercise, I'm going to beat this. Then all these free radicals get kicked up, and then they create inflammation, they agitate the muscles and the nerves, and then bang, here comes the pain.
So these people are right. It does hurt to move.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, we get into this whole like concept of, some doctors wanting to say, hey, this is all in your head. Well,
yeah,
sure. I mean, your brain is processing all of these things, but there's physiological reasons for this. And, people these fibromyalgia sufferers deserve more than this write-off that it's all in your head. I mean, as you can see, we've got clear physiological reasons for every single pain that they have.
Yes.
When you talk to anybody with fibromyalgia, they'll say like, oh, I get this pain in the morning, this pain in the evening, this pain is sharp, this pain is dull, this one feels better with pressure, this one feels worse with pressure. Those are little alarm clocks. Those are little signals that your body is saying that, hey, here's the type of problem I have going on here. And then people get confused, practitioners get confused because they see so many different pains and so many different types of pains that it suddenly becomes a lot to wrap your head around. And it's like, this just sounds nuts. Especially if you don't understand all the processes that are being involved basically simultaneously.
Yeah. So what's the punchline? Like for those people who are having trouble moving, like what did you end up sharing?
First and foremost, I mean, starting with very, very basic movement is key. I mean, it doesn't have to be, we're going to get up and we're going to suddenly spring into CrossFit. I mean, that's usually a very, very bad idea. And, this should be known fairly well across the board. Just basic movement and increasing that basic movement very, very gradually. And this can be as much as moving your arms around. I like to teach people to get up and just kind of lightly shake their body. This is not a very jarring movement at all. It helps loosen up the muscles. It helps stimulate blood flow so that things do get moving, and it's not this, cataclysmic event that's going to generate tons and tons of pain. Plus, as we start to work with this gastrotransmitter therapy, it starts to stimulate the heart. It starts to stimulate blood flow already. That combined with the fact that we're using natural medicines to combat the inflammation and the pains themselves, it's usually it's an oddly simple and very gratifying journey for them.
There is, so that makes a lot of sense, right? Like start gentle, start light, but something is better than nothing. And being able to, it's like shaking the body. You're increasing the flow of lymph, you're increasing the flow of blood. You are, in the Qigong tradition, there's a long history of shaking as sometimes an entire practice. So that this is one of those things that has roots that go back thousands of years that are, and even like shaking can be part of post-trauma treatments that are currently people are using for helping the body to discharge old traumas affecting the nervous system. So I think shaking is a really interesting practice for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
With natural medicine, so using plants, using things found in nature, are you going after a virus here? Are you going after, is it strictly about dulling the pain sensations? Like what's the strategy with, if you can give us a sense of what are we trying to do with natural medicine for fibromyalgia at really any of these stages that you'd like to talk about, recognizing that it's going to be different depending on which of these 8 stages one is involved in?
Well, I think you captioned it very well right there, that it will vary depending on what stage they're in currently. Mm-hmm. And, to just kind of spring off it. I mean, when we start to look at the very first stage, I mean, something that is a big issue with people suffering from fibromyalgia is that they have a lot of lymphatic congestion. I mean, their body is holding too much fluid, and their ability to eliminate all this, their lymphatic system, is basically completely overburdened. And this is a byproduct of multiple things. It's a byproduct of a digestive problem. It's a byproduct of a liver that is basically taxed and unable to help in filtering this. And so all this extracellular waste and material starts to end up basically making the body swell and the lymphatic system swell. This plagues the brain. It gets pushed out into the connective tissue, which of course causes muscle pain and the characteristic tender points associated with fibromyalgia. So when we first get started, one of the first things I do is I utilize natural medicines that are going to go after improving lymphatic function, that are going to also start looking at if there is any hidden pathogen within there. And it's not just about, taking like an antibiotic to get rid of a bacteria or antiviral to get rid of a virus, but looking at, okay, can we put something together that is going to enable the body to take care of this on its own. I mentioned this concept of biofilms before, and we've actually commissioned the production of some pretty amazing formulas to help combat this specific phenomenon, which is now starting to finally get some buzz. But in order to do this, we need to have something that's going to start to break down that biofilm. We need to have something in there that's going to help deal with the inflammation, deal with any pathogens that are in there. We also need something in there that's going to support the body and the body's innate immune system to be able to fight by itself, so that the body can learn to start taking care of itself. So when we're starting within really the first 4 stages, all of our natural medicines, all of our gastrotransmitter therapy, diet, anything that we're working with, all of it is aimed at essentially removing obstructions from the body. And that could mean excess fluid. Like in the first stage, it could mean biofilms, things having to do with the immune system. When we get into stage 2, we're really looking at fermentation or really big disharmonies that are occurring in the gut. And regardless of how their digestion feels, we find this is a problem in virtually 100% of those suffering from fibromyalgia. And then as we move further from there, we're looking at stage 3 and dealing with chronic stress and how, elevated cortisol has damaged the liver, and how we can start to do things that are going to protect the liver and help lower cortisol levels, scavenge that excessive nitric oxide that I mentioned before. And then we start looking at, of course, circulation, and if there are still circulation problems. The really fascinating thing about taking an approach like this is that, we go through these first 3 stages and we're removing obstructions throughout the body. By the time we get to stage 4, which does involve circulation, most of the time it's no longer an issue, because we've basically taken the burden off of the rest of the body. So now the body is moving better. The circulation is moving better. You're getting better blood flow and oxygen flow into the brain, so people think better. The brain fog tends to lift. So the medicines that we're using really are very stage specific and based on where the primary issue is. Is it more immune? Is it more digestive? Is it more having to do with the stress response?
I really appreciated that when I took your course. I really appreciated that focus on let's remove the things that are in the way first, right? Because once you clear that off, then as you said, a lot of times that the body knows how to heal itself, but it's if there's things that are gunking up the works, then getting that out of the way first makes so much sense. And the way that Chinese herbal medicine has traditionally been used, it's these very elegant synergistic combinations where the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts that work together to go after these underlying imbalances. So there's just a real elegance to it, I think, in terms of that you don't have to be taking 10,000 things. You can be taking one formula that's really sophisticated and expertly put together to go after a particular aspect of the imbalance, and then you move through that. And then if there's any supplementation that's needed, then that happens later. But this idea that when people are tired, there's a temptation to want to supplement, to nourish and add to what seems like a condition of deficiency in the language of Chinese medicine practitioners. And that's often not what it's about. It's about clearing off the excess to help things work better.
You really do bring up a good point there. And, one of the things that I hate to see, we have some people that will come in and they're taking a grocery bag full of different supplements, and there's just too much information out there for us at this point that, it's I heard this supplement is good for that, or this supplement is good for that. And oftentimes it is that. It's trying to boost up some specific nutrient. So we take huge quantities of that nutrient. Now, what I'm finding is that if we actually fix the other things, the obstruction, so to speak, in the body, and get it functioning properly itself, we often don't need these things, because our digestive system works better. We can actually extract nutrient. We can utilize nutrient better rather than just trying to cram tons of it in there. I mean, sometimes we've got so much swelling in the body. There's so much fluid in and around our cell that they just can't take some of this stuff on. So we can be feeding ourselves all this stuff, and then we just end up basically urinating it out. And
right.
It's very sad because, I look at the research behind this, and your average person suffering from fibromyalgia is spending over $5,000 per year out of pocket on this kind of thing.
Oh,
that's free of insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're looking for answers because the typical advice out there and what might be covered by insurance doesn't do it for them.
Yeah,
Uh,
unfortunately not.
there's, as you mentioned with the biofilms discussion, I just wanted to circle back to that because I've read that there is this, and as you mentioned, right, this 100% connection between gut dysbiosis, leaky gut syndrome, things like that, and fibromyalgia. And yet sometimes paradoxically digestion, like I have one person in mind who's like her diet could not be like better. It's impeccable,
Mm-hmm.
right? She's completely cut out sugar, she's completely cut out refined flour, all the things that we think of as like that get in the way. And yet there's still a problem there. I'm curious if there is, like, beyond things that might be obvious, like cut out sugar, is there any dietary advice that you give to people with fibro?
Yeah, the first thing, I mean, I give this to just about everybody because in our society we either eat really really bad or we eat bad. And what I mean by that is, I mean, it could be one thing to have your diet be Mountain Dew and Snickers bars every day. And I give that example because this was literally one of my fibro clients. I mean, every day she was only consuming, soda and candy bars. That was literally her whole diet. So, that was of course really bad. But then, we get caught up in this, okay, I want to do something good. And even with the best intentions, sometimes we end up really hurting ourselves through certain dietary practices. A good example I talked about recently was this trend of smoothies in the morning where we're throwing tons of kale and other green vegetables into a blender, usually with some fruit, maybe some yogurt, and blending it, and then that becomes breakfast. And the parts of it may seem healthy, but you take a digestive system that's already hurting, that's already not functioning that well, and then you throw something like that at it, which has already a ton of ingredients, which, as we know, is difficult for the digestive system to handle. When you throw a bunch of things at it all at once, it's very cold, which basically can slow down and retard the digestive system. It can cause things like headaches. It can cause fatigue. It actually causes swallowing difficulties with people who already have trouble swallowing. So they're taking in something cold like that. The fact that it's been blended has broken down a lot of the fibers in the plants so that now it brings the blood sugar levels up very, very quickly. And now when blood sugar levels fluctuate like this, that can cause things like pain. It can cause inflammation. It can cause mood issues because now your blood sugar goes up and down. That makes your mood go up and down. So this causes things like depression. When the blood sugar drops like that, it can also cause people to have headaches. It can cause them to feel weak or fatigued. It gives that characteristic hangry type feeling that everybody talks about these days. Not only that, but if it really plummets while you're sleeping, it'll wake you up in the middle of the night because now your body is basically trying to keep itself from a coma because your blood sugar goes low. So now your adrenals kick in and make you get up. So, sometimes the best intentions can still cause some kind of issue. So the thing the blanket advice that I like to give people, it's very, very simple. It's not harmful, is to start their day simply with a cup of warm ginger tea. And this could be from freshly grated ginger. It could be from a ginger packet, but just starting the day with that by itself before your breakfast will already start to warm the gut. It'll start to get digestive processes working better. And it will usually actually make you digest your breakfast even better anyways. Plus, the ginger itself is antimicrobial, so it tends to kill off some of the bad bacteria that we're harboring in our gut. So it's an incredibly simple thing, an easy way to start the day that is already going to be beneficial.
I love that. And it really is like, yeah, like just that I really resonate with what you said about the green smoothies and all that, yeah, it's complex, it's cold, it's potentially blood sugar spiky, and that we're not what we eat, we are what we digest. And so just starting your day, setting yourself up for good digestion, and incidentally, if it can work on those biofilms that might be present, so much the better.
And
Before,
to that effect,
yeah.
bringing up the biofilms again, I had a client like this a little over a year ago. It actually looked like her digestion was very, very good as well. The problems were major pain, major fatigue, and lots of stress. So when we began the process, I really went after the transmitter therapy for it. We worked with the diet, we worked with all of these things. And her diet was already pretty good, and she had zero digestive complaints. And now we knocked the pain and fatigue down by about 60%, which, I mean, if you're suffering with that much pain and fatigue, that's definitely a win. But to me, it wasn't enough. But then when we finally started going after the stress component, we talked about earlier, this whole nitric oxide balance in the body. Now, when stress is a big issue, nitric will be dysregulated. We already know that. But when we properly regulate nitric oxide in the body, our body has a natural ability to break down biofilms. So it basically, when your body's functioning properly, it can scour itself and help break down these biofilms that are harboring these pathogens. So we get in and started doing this and just treating that aspect there, working on the stress component. And she ended up with a ton of diarrhea. Now remember, she had no digestive issues before. She's like, whoa, I'm doing all this stuff and I got all this diarrhea. I said, okay, how is the pain and the fatigue now? It was gone. And her words were, okay, I don't feel them anymore. So as her body was starting to regulate its own nitric oxide, she was basically cleansing herself of this. And we just kept going. And this digestive issue, I'm going to put that in quotations, this issue, which seemed like a symptom, was really a healing reaction.
Oh,
her body eliminating all this extra stuff. And then beyond that, I mean, she was just fantastic.
And so really this is like using the gastrotransmitter therapy. We change the environment, the internal ecosystem. We change the conditions that basically make it a hospitable or an inhospitable environment for the bacteria that live within us. And so it's as that changed, her ecosystem became less hospitable to the bad guys. She had this healing crisis in the form of diarrhea. Her pain went away. And I assume the diarrhea eventually went away as well?
It did. It cleared up on its own.
Yeah.
It's very similar to like putting, those big blow dryers in a house after there's been a leak. You use these big blow dryers to dry the area out so that it's now an inhospitable environment for the mold that would have grown there.
I love that so much because so far, like, it really does speak to the importance of seeing the interconnectedness of the different systems of the body. Because if you're solely looking at digestion without looking at stress and without looking at the impact that then has, like in this case that you just mentioned, you're never going to get to the bottom of it.
And that's kind of where we get caught up a little bit. There's a lot of great, well-meaning practitioners, of a lot of very intelligent doctors out there that are trying to wrap their heads around this. And oftentimes they'll go and specialize and they'll become very intelligent at something like neurology. Like a good friend of mine was the chief neurologist at one of the military hospitals. I mean, one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. But when it came to fibromyalgia, she would send them our way, and she's like, I don't know what to do with these people. And it becomes a lot like trying to renovate an old house. An old house that has been abused with years of neglect. Now, the windows are broken, the roof leaks, the floorboards are moldy, it's waterlogged, the wiring is fried. And then you go and get some expert advice saying like, oh, well, the key to a comfortable house is nice new carpet. So you go and you replace the carpet and you walk around barefoot. It's gorgeous. It feels really, really nice. But then it rains and the roof leaks and the water gets in through the windows and destroys your nice new carpet because you didn't fix the outside of the house first. It's very similar to that. It's kind of the same way that we have to apply these stages. We have to look at how one thing might affect another. So that's why we start with the one and then move into the next and then move into the next when it's the appropriate time for the body.
It makes so much sense. And it really is. I think it's so important that people out there know that there is a coherent way of thinking about moving through these stages with a practitioner who can help. Chris, you've been so generous with your time, and I'm sure like we could keep this conversation going all day. But before we wrap up here, I wanted to give you one last opportunity to share any pieces of advice that you would give for someone out there with fibromyalgia. Anything else that you might suggest that might improve their lives right now?
Yes, I have a specific one that I really love. I do this every single day myself. It's a special practice that there's been research out there showing that it may actually be as effective as some antidepressant drugs. And it takes you about a minute to do. And I'd like to just walk everybody through it here while we're on this.
Fantastic. Okay. Yes, please.
Okay. It's very, very simple. Just sit comfortably in a chair. You place your hands in your lap, or if there is a place that you tend to feel your stress or feel anxiety, or when you feel very emotional, like if you feel it in your chest or you feel it in your tummy, place one of your hands over it and just leave your hands there. And now, very slowly, I want you to take 3 deep breaths. So in through the nose, and then slowly out through the mouth. And then in again, and out. One more, in through the nose, and out. And now what you're going to do is you are going to speak out loud 3 things that you are grateful for. And it can be anything simple. It can be a major thing. For me, I am grateful for my 2 beautiful sons. I'm grateful that I had a wonderful breakfast this morning. And I'm grateful to have such great colleagues like Brodie. So speak those 3 things. Let yourself feel that gratitude. And then we're going to do 3 more deep breaths, starting by going in through the nose and then out through the mouth. In through the nose again and out. And then one more in and out. My suggestion would be to do that at least once a day. Do it first thing in the morning and let your day be started with a sense of calm and a feeling of gratitude. When we're in a state of gratitude, we are basically free of fear, we're free of stress, we're free of anger. It's like the antidote to those things.
I love that so much. Thank you for walking us through that. I feel lighter just having that little minute of focus.
Yeah, you never not feel better from that.
Seriously. Yeah, that seems like very safe across the board advice. Chris, if people are interested in connecting with you or perhaps working with you, where do they go?
My first suggestion, we've got a website that we've got up. It's fibrosolution.com. And we've got a webinar masterclass on there that points the direction of some of these major things in ways that you can start to move forward. We do big breakthrough calls for people as well, where we see what's going on. We see if we're a good fit or what's going to be a good fit for them. We offer that as well, and that's really the best place to start. The real key here is that it's this old adage of you can't see what's on the outside of the glass when you're sitting inside of the glass. It's very often important to have some kind of a guide who can sort of lead you along the way. And so that's where I would have people start.
All right. That'll be in the show notes for people, fibrosolution.com. Chris Volesky, thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy world to connect with us and to share your wisdom here on A Healthy Curiosity.
Thank you so much, Brodie. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodiewelch.com. That's Brodie with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.